Hey everyone, my name is Lauren Davis, and I have the honor of serving on staff here at Wichita First Church. Wherever you're joining us from, I just want to say thank you for being with us. Right now, we're in a series called Origin Stories, and we're talking about the Tower of Babel. Pastor Scott pointed out the 4 ways that the people of this story continually chose to pull away from God and choose their own glory. He showed us that we need to choose a different path, a path that leans on the grace and truth of God and His glory alone. I'm super excited for you to hear this message, so let's jump right in.
Well, it's so good to see you. Good morning. My family and I have been gone for just a little bit, and we're so glad to be back. You were in great hands while we were gone. Pastor Sam and Pastor Aaron and Pastor Brittany brought some powerful messages. If you missed those, you want to go back and listen, I promise you. Really fantastic in this series that we've been doing. Don't we have a fantastic staff? I don't know if you know that, but they're amazing. Yeah. Well, this story addresses a basic human problem. It's the struggle to understand each other. A year ago, several of us went to Malawi, where you as a congregation, we've together been building water wells in Malawi, and we went to visit Malawi, and there's a language barrier. Now, some of you have been around, you know, I was actually born there, but I don't speak the language. That which means I don't speak much of the language. That's about all I know. That's it. That and where's the bathroom, and that's about all I can manage. We went there, and there was an immediate language barrier. This picture that you see right here is one of the village mothers saying thank you to you. I wish you could have heard what she said. But the only way I could understand it was through a translator. Why? Because there was a language barrier. There was a struggle for us to understand each other. Now, if you were to take a surface level reading of this passage, and I don't know that I've ever heard a message preached on the Tower of Babel, so we'll see how this goes today. But if you were to take a surface level reading of this text, what you might think is, okay, I got it. This is the Bible's story, or maybe this is a myth. Who knows what this is in the Bible about how we got all of the languages. And that would be a very surface level reading, and this is not actually what it is. It's a story about this basic human problem about why it is that you and I struggle to make connections with each other. And language represents what happens inside of our hearts as we try to make connections with each other. Let me give you some examples. Have you ever been at work and wondered if you can trust your boss? Now, don't raise your hand. Or have you had coworkers where you think, I'm not sure I can trust them? You want to connect with them. You want your experience at work to be something that you enjoy, but you wonder, like, there's a disconnect there. Or have you ever been in a relationship and you're frustrated that you can't get along? Let's say you're dating, you're trying to find the one, and you know the one is out there, but you go on these dates, and then you meet somebody, and you're like, why is that not the one, and that's not the one, and that's not the one, and you wonder if you're ever going to find the one. Or maybe you have kids, and your kids are older, or your kids are younger, and you think, why is it that we struggle? Why is it that we struggle to get along? Now, I'm not talking about this. I know something tragic happened in our country yesterday. This is not what the message is about, but I'd already planned to say this. So here we are in this political season, right? And we're asking ourselves as a country, we're saying, well, where do we go from here? How in the world do people who are at loggerheads and just want to literally kill each other, how do we get along without killing each other? It's an illustration of the basic human problem, the struggle that we have to understand each other. Do you feel this? I feel this. And then we got to ask the question, so why is it that this happens? And not only why does this happen, why does it happen so often? And why is it so frustrating when it happens, and what do we do about it? So we're going to talk about that this morning. I'm going to give you 3 headings that we're going to talk about this morning, and then we'll talk about them. Number 1 is what it is, and you and I need to pay attention to this, what you don't realize that sin is doing to you. Did you know sin is doing something to you and you don't realize it? Talk about that. Second, what is it that we try to do about it? Because we have these common human strategies that we employ to try and make up for our misunderstandings. And then how do we get to the place that we finally see each other? What you don't realize sin is doing to you, what we try to do about it, and finally seeing each other. How do we get to that place? Now, let's talk about what you don't realize sin is doing to you. You have to read Genesis chapter 11 in the context of Genesis chapter 1 through 11. You have to zoom out. We've talked about several of these important stories, and it's a series of stories in the Scriptures, the first book of the Bible, that describes to us both our purpose and our pain. So purpose, we're created for something, and then the pain that we cause each other and ourselves when we miss that purpose that we were created for. So you go to Genesis 1 and 2, Pastor Brittany talked about Adam and Eve and how they were created, and you find there the intent, the purpose, Genesis 1 and 2. You have a creational intent from God. You were made in the image of God. You know what that means about you? That means that you have dignity. It means you have value. When God made you, God said that you were good. So that means that if you've ever wrestled with feelings of shame and worthlessness, those are not the truth. The truth is that you were made good. You have value. And then you were given creative work to do. You were given purpose in the world. Now, this is, if we were able to follow these three things that were put in us by God at our creation, then that's a roadmap for how the human family could be one. Like, so if you have dignity and you are made good and you have a purpose, and I have dignity and I am made good and I have a purpose, and we could both see that, then we'd be one, wouldn't we? We'd go, there's just us. But the problem that you and I know is that that's not the reality. There's us and them. So then you go to Genesis chapter 3, which is the introduction of pain into the human story, and we find there a picture of how we came to the human condition, and we understand the basic human problem. For generations, there was a primer that was put into schools starting way back in the 1800s called the New England Primer, and when you learned how to read, you used the New England Primer. So it's for decades, well into the 1900s. And it started off, when you learned the alphabet, I got a picture of a copy of it, you started off by paying attention to where the pain in the situation came from, and it said, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. That's a summary statement about the human condition and where pain comes from. And here's the point that Genesis 3 through 11 is trying to make through these stories that we've looked at and the story we're looking at today. You and I are afflicted by what I'm going to call the distortional effect of sin. The distortional effect of sin. What does that mean, Scott? What are you trying to say? Well, let me try and tap into a common human experience. There's some of us in the room that we need corrective lenses for our eyes. Anybody? Just to show of hands, how many of you need corrective lenses, right? Like, I'm wearing contacts right now. I need corrective lenses. So those of us who have corrective lenses, maybe you've had this experience, or if you don't need corrective lenses, we all hate you. And but you've maybe had this experience where someone else is wearing glasses, and you say, "Let me try on your glasses." How many of you have had this experience, right? And you put someone else's prescription on, or maybe you don't need glasses at all, and you think, man, you are blind. What is wrong with you? And you put these lenses on, and immediately you experience a distortion of reality through your vision. Are you tracking with me? Or maybe you haven't had that experience. Maybe you've been traveling, and someone took your sunglasses, and you needed sunglasses, and you didn't want to drop any coin on the sunglasses, and so you stopped at one of those little roadside places and you got one of those cheap pairs of $4.99 sunglasses. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, when you put them on, you don't even know what you're looking at. They're so bad, they're so terrible, but you need something. And in either of those realities, what happens is you see everything distorted. Now, you know that when it happens, right? You put them on, everything's distorted. But let's just say that you were to forget that you had them on, and you left them on all the time. And then you started to think, this is what you would start to think, you forgot that they were on. You would start to go, well, this is reality. This is what life is like. And the distortion that you see would become normal. And you would all the while be wearing these glasses while failing to realize that you're seeing through a distortion field. This is the picture of what sin does to us. It creates this distortional effect. So we looked at several paradigmatic stories, scenes in Genesis 3 through 11. There's 4 specific ones that we've looked at, one we're looking at today. And what that means is that they happen, so we can read them and say, okay, this is what happened in the human story, but that they also happen. Remember, we read the text, we are saying this is a mirror to us about our human experience. And when we read the stories, we see ourselves. And so Adam and Eve, what were they? They were one. They were made by God with creational intent, image and dignity and goodness and creative purpose. And what do? They hide because they sin. And then Cain and Abel, they're supposed to be brothers. They're supposed to love each other. Cain is supposed to be his brother's keeper. But what happens? He's jealous and he kills his brother and he introduces hate into the world. And then Noah, God's going to rebuild the world through Noah. And Noah then goes and builds a vineyard and gets drunk and is uncovered in a cave. And this weird story happens. He introduces difficulty into the human story. And then there's this story of the Tower of Babel or Tower of Babel. It's a story about human fear and frailty. Here's what all the stories say. They say that you and I do not see reality accurately, and our problem is that we don't see reality accurately. Are you with me? Now, let me give you 3 really practical ways this plays out, because I want you to think about that this week, and I want you to hopefully see the lenses that you have on when you look at the world around you. And let me just give it to you through a lens of shouldn't there be some group somewhere in the world that kind of gets along? Wouldn't you imagine who that group might be? I was listening to someone talk about this not too long ago, and they lead a mission organization that sends missionaries around the world. And they said, everyone thinks that missionaries, so they go places and they're these super spiritual people, and they have their act together and everything's right. He said, but I'm just going to tell you right now that what missionaries don't realize when they go to another country is that they bring themselves with them. And they're defined, they don't realize what it is that their sin is doing. And he named 3 things. He said they have brokenness. They all start with B if you're taking notes. Brokenness. Well, it's brokenness. Well, you've been through some things, right? You have been hurt, and you then have covered yourself from the hurt. And then you're not even often aware that you did it, and you get this sore spot on your heart. And anytime someone rubs up against that sore spot, you lash out because you've got a broken place. I love The Lord of the Rings, J.R. Tolkien, and one of the first books, Frodo's the main character, so bear with me while I nerd out here for a second. Frodo's the main character, and there's this scene. It gets played out if you've seen the movies. Books are always better than the movies, but it happens in the movies as well. But Frodo's up on the top of this mountain called Weathertop, and he receives this wound that goes into him from a sword. And it doesn't happen in the movies, but in the books, it's this repeated scene all the way through J.R. Tolkien's masterpiece, where Frodo feels the hurt. Someone will bump into him, and he'll go, "Oh, that wound I received on Weathertop." If you've wondered why hurt comes out of you sometime, I'll tell you why. It's because you have a broken place. And my friend who leads this mission organization, he said that happens for missionaries, and so it happens for you too. And then he said the second thing is that you have biases. And what's a bias is that you privilege how you see things. And here's what happens is you assume that you are right and that the other person is wrong. That's what a bias is. I'm right. Doesn't matter what you say to me. You're wrong. And all that's happening is that you are, at that moment, you're not allowing the other person to see it from their angle, because either you don't have the maturity or the empathy to see that their perspective is also a valid perspective. And here's how biases work. We assume that the more important the issue is to us, the more right we are. And then we become biased toward what you see and not what they see. That's what a bias is. Brokenness, bias, and then blind spot. You're driving. My kids are all driving now, and I'm terrified. I love my kids. But I have to talk to them about blind spots. Adjust the mirrors, and you push the mirrors out so you can see the... But even when you've adjusted the mirrors, what do you have to do when you're changing lanes? What do you have to do? You have to look over your shoulder, and because someone might be in your blind spot. And that's us, isn't it? Either from our temperament or from our personality or from our upbringing. Let's say if you're a big picture person, your blind spot might be that you don't see the details. And if you're a detail person, your blind spot might be that it's hard for you to see the big picture. And so if something is normal to you, it's weird to someone else, but because of our blind spot, we don't see it. We're not aware. We're not cognizant. So, sum this up. Here's what you don't realize sin is doing to you, and it's our common human affliction, and it's our common human problem. Sin creates a distortional lens through which you and I see the world. Are you with me? Now, what do we try to do about it? Well, this story, the Tower of Babel, is a story about human response and 4 strategies that we employ to make the world what we think it ought to be. It's in verse 4. I'm going to put it on the screen for you of Genesis chapter 11. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city," there's the first one, "with a tower that reaches to the heavens," there's the second one, "so that we may make a name for ourselves," there's the third one, "otherwise we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth," there's the fourth one. Now, I got to cut to the punchline without getting into all of the textual issues here. This story is meant to tell us about the human project without God. Even just in this one verse, the word ourselves is mentioned twice, and we is mentioned twice, and there's no mention of God. So what we're meant to read when we read the story is, this is what the human project looks like when people go through it without God. These are the strategies of the human project without God. Now, you may say, okay, well, what's wrong with all of these things? Building cities? What's the deal with... This sounds like, not throwing away my shot. I don't want to... Here's the key to understand and get this passage is, you could do all of these things with God, but this is a story of how we do it without God. And whenever we do it without God, we get the shadow version of these things. So can I show you these 4 strategies? First one is build a city. What is that? I'm going to call that being productive. Be productive if you're taking notes. So in other words, you create something, or you make something, or you do something, and now you guys say, well, wait. Isn't that good? What, are you telling me I shouldn't make or do or create things? Again, go back to Genesis chapter 1. This is part of the creation mandate that you and I were made in the image of God, meaning we're creative like God. Listen to Genesis chapter 1, what God says about us. God blessed them, that's you, and said to them, that's you, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over every living creature that moves on the ground." In other words, you and I are to do in our world what God did for us in creation. So when you see someone building something, that's part of the creation mandate. So it doesn't matter if you're building a business, or you're building a spreadsheet, or you're building a child, or you're building a house, or you're building a car. You and I are supposed to build. In fact, the Bible starts in a garden and ends in the book of Revelation in a city. So we're intended by God to build something, right? And to build something, that's the human default. But so it's not that we build. That's not what's at issue here. It's how we build and who we build with. Because when you do it without God, you get the shadow version. So what's the shadow side of being productive? Let me tell you. Your production becomes a way to protect yourself. You believe that I'm going to build something, and when I build it, I'll finally be safe. And when I build it, I will have trust that everything is going to go okay with me. You have to understand a little bit about when says we build a city. This means this was a walled city. You and I, when we're tourists, that's part of what drives the global economy now is tourism. And so when you go to a city, you don't go to, we didn't go out to Denver, Colorado and find a big wall around Denver, Colorado or Colorado Springs. No, they have signs saying, come visit our city. We want you to visit our city. But then when people built a city, they built it on purpose to protect themselves from the others. And so you would send your warriors outside of the walls of your protective thing that you had built to the other city and other cities in the other places, because usually you were at odds with those other cities, or you were afraid of those other cities and what they might do to you. Now, we do it differently today, right? What we do is we send our chiefs out to defeat that mountain city's Broncos. Are you with me? And we send our chiefs to go crush the coastal city's raiders, right? And then we send our chiefs to make pets out of other coastal cities' dolphins. Are you following what I'm saying? Some of you will get that later. You're like, what was he saying? I don't understand. And what we do is we mitigate the fear with our champion. We send our champion out to do that because we don't do that anymore. We're not afraid that way. Because what did God mean from the beginning? Well, again, he created us. He created the human family. And what's happening right here in this passage is that the human family said, I'm going to build a walled city to keep the other people out. So what's happened? Now there's us and them. Do you see that? Okay, so the first thing is you try to be productive, build a city. Second is you try to be religious, a tower that reaches to the heavens. Now, the text introduces, it says a plain in Shinar. I want to show you where the plain in Shinar is. That's ancient Iraq, well, modern day Iraq. And got a couple pictures here of the beautiful Euphrates Valley, where the Euphrates River is, and then a plain there in Iraq, which would have been where the ancient city of Babylon was built. In fact, you can go visit what's called the Ishtar Gate in a museum in, I believe it's in Britain, that was uncovered of the ancient city of Babylon here in this place that this text is referring to. These are real places. And those cities were built with walls, but they were also built as religious centers. And so at the center of the city, the most important building was the tallest building, and it was a temple to the god. And at the top of the temple to the god, there would be a room at the top where they would put food for the deity when the deity would come down from heaven. In fact, Babel or Babylon, the word means literally gate of the gods. In fact, that's still the name of the province there in Iraq today. And this is, you have to read it and say this was also a critique of Babylon, and which was the superpower of the day and their religion. In fact, if you go to the book of Daniel, you'll find that in Daniel there was a statue that was put up in that same plain, the plain of Shinar in Babylon, and with a figure with its head up in the heavens, and people were to worship it. And so what happens is people were finding something to worship besides the God of heaven and earth. They were being religious as a strategy to make themselves okay. Now, what's religion? Oh, let's talk about this for a second. Religion is an attempt to reach what matters the most, and it operates on an assumption. Here's the assumption of religion. Are you ready? The assumption of religion is closing the gap between us and the divine is up to us. The assumption of religion is that closing the gap between us and God is a project that's up to us. Religion is a human project. So I have to be a moral person, or I have to be a good person, or I have to be a holy person. And when I am moral enough, or good enough, or holy enough, or I do the right things in the right order, then I will get God, who is up there, to come down here where I am. And so what I think I have to do is I have to make a tower to reach up to the heavens through my effort. And then when I get it right, and I make the tower high enough by my efforts, then I'll get God to come to me. Have you ever had the sense that you don't have enough of God in your life, and it's because you've failed? I don't pray enough, and I don't read the Bible enough, and I skip church too much, and that must be why things aren't working out in my life. You know where that is? You know what that is? That's the echo of religion in the cavern of your heart. That's what that is. That's not the Holy Spirit. That's the echo of religion. That tower is very famously is known around the world as a ziggurat. You've probably seen that, the picture we've had on the screen. And the ziggurat, the main feature of the ziggurat was the stairs. And the stairs, what are stairs? Stairs are a way for me to go from down here to up there. They're a symbol of religion. It's either I can go down there, or I've built it up so that God will know, okay, this is how I come down to you. And all religion is a monument to the human project without God, without the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the creator of the heavens of the earth, the eternal God. And at the same time, it's a recognition that we're irrevocably creatures who have to worship something. Now, again, you may say, well, we don't build towers like that today. What are you talking about? Not so fast. We build temples to the things that we worship. Go to the cities, go to downtown. We're right here by downtown. Go to any large city, look at the tallest buildings, look at the name on the top of the building. You know what it is? It's a temple to money, or it's a temple to power. Sin is the origin, this right here, this text is the origin of the word secular. The secular, the root word means to be cut off from, on my own. I'm cut off, and so I must reach up on my own. If you were like, well, it's the entertainment industry, that's why we live in a secular society. No. The record of the scriptures from the beginning is that it's in the human heart. That's where it comes from. And so sin will distort your field of view and make you think you have to reach God, and that is your only option. You'll believe I'm cut off, and if I'm going to be reconnected to God, then it's up to me. This is all my project. Nobody's coming to help. I better be really religious. So be productive, be religious. Third thing, make a name for ourselves, which is to establish an identity and figure out how I can justify my existence. Establish an identity and figure out how I can justify my existence. Now, this is interesting. Make a name for ourselves. God isn't against people having a name. In fact, when God chooses Abram in one chapter 12, he says, Abram, I'm going to make your name great. And what the text is telling us is it's God's role to make people great. It's the distortion field of sin that makes us think, number one, we need that, and number two, that it's up to us. I mean, this is certainly a story, this is certainly a statement about human ambition, and it's certainly a window into the human heart, and we think if I'm just ambitious enough and I make a name for myself and I become somebody and people think of me with respect, then we'll get an identity and then we'll be able to justify our existence on planet Earth. Now, there are tremendous question marks about identity and how we justify our existence today. We have this phrase that we're starting to say as a culture, and you've heard this. You've heard people say, I identify as. And I looked this up, and I Googled this, and according to what I found, I'm sure maybe it's more, maybe it's less, I don't know, there are currently 72 answers that people give, I identify as. 72 different. Now, that may bug you, and you may go, that's what's wrong with the world. Scott, you need to preach more sermons against that. That's just awful. Before you throw that stone, I want you to look in your own heart and ask yourself, if you said to yourself, I identify as successful, I identify as beautiful, I identify as smart, I identify as wealthy, I identify as spiritual. I identify as good. You see, it's in the human heart to try and establish an identity, and by establishing an identity, justifying our existence on the planet. Do you see that? There's this beautiful Christian doctrine called the justification by faith. And often when we talk about justification by faith, we sometimes limit it by thinking that it's only about this legal way that God makes us right. So we have guilt, and we go before the judge God, and Jesus stands in our place in that heavenly courtroom and says, no, I have paid the price for your sins. Look at my record, not his record or her record, and forgives us. It's a beautiful, beautiful doctrine. But it's also a way, I think we miss this often, it's also a way of saying that in the end, our existence is justified by God. We don't have to struggle for our identity. We are sons and daughters of God. We don't have to speak on our own behalf. God speaks for us and says, I pick you. I choose you. Your existence is justified on planet Earth. You don't have to make a name for yourself to be somebody. I already think that you are. That's the gospel. That's the good news. Fourth strategy that we employ, be productive, be religious, find an identity so that we can justify our existence. And the fourth is this, is that we try to mobilize fear. Notice they said, we're going to build this city, we're going to make a tower to the heavens, and we're going to make a name for ourselves so that we can avoid being scattered. What's happening is it's our fear of being alone, and we take our fear of being alone and we let it propel us. You know this thing, like when the settlers would go out, through the west, and they would be on the covered wagons, and then at night, what would they do? We have a phrase, we call it circle the wagons, right? They would circle the wagons, and they would say, we're going to circle the wagons so the forces of the night and the enemies that might be against us, they can't get us. They want to scatter us, but we're going to circle the wagons. We're going to mobilize our fear, and we're going to make sure that we're okay. Now, again, my message was not about this. This was already in my message before the events of yesterday. But that's what we're doing, isn't it, in our political rhetoric? Let me just say about yesterday, this is my only comment, violence won't solve anything. Nothing. It's just a cycle. It's a cycle of violence. Yeah, well, you did this to me, I'm going to do this to you. Oh, yeah, you did that to me. It never ends. That's the human story. Never-ending cycle of violence. Never going to solve anything. In fact, in the fall, we already had this plan. We're going to do a series just real short on Jesus and politics. But here's my point. Do you see that all the sides are doing the same thing? Is that they're not just mobilizing fear, but they weaponize fear? And they say, there's us, but don't let them scatter you. What they want to do is they want to scatter you, so listen to us, right? What's happening? Mobilizing fear. So you build a city, that's your production, a tower to heavens, that's trying to be religious. You try to make a name for yourself, that's your identity, your justification, your ambition. You avoid being scattered, that's mobilizing fear. What is that? That's our agenda. And the thing that keeps me from seeing you and you from seeing me and from us connecting to each other is I can't see you because I am focused on my agenda. That's what's going on here in this text. So what is it that we need to finally see each other and be able to connect? Well, what would we need? We would need someone to intervene. We would need someone with perspective who sees what's actually happening. Now, if you're here all the time, you won't be surprised at this, but if you're a guest with us today, you might be going, okay, now you're going to give me the religious answer, and you're going to tell me the religious answer to this story. And don't you know, Scott, the story of the elephant? Do you know the story of the elephant? It's a kind of a famous story about religion, and it says that there's this elephant, and there's all these blind men, and one feels the elephant and feels the trunk, and says the elephant, without seeing the elephant is solid and thick and round, and another one has the tail and says, no, it's not. It's small and it moves around, and another one has the tusks and says, no, it's long and has a point on the end, and another one's feeling the ears and says, no, it's flappy. And what people do when they talk about religion and that story is they say, see, everybody just has a perspective. They're just saying that all religion is biased. It all comes from a perspective. But that assumes that person is not blind and sees the whole thing. And the story is trying to say that everybody comes from a perspective. And it's its own form of blindness, because who sees the whole thing? Nobody. So you would need someone who could see from a vantage point that's higher than the rest of us the whole thing, someone higher who comes down. Now, you would be shocked, wouldn't you, to find out in Genesis 11:5, but the Lord, what? Came down to see the city and the tower that the people were building. Now, you don't miss this. This is actually biblical sarcasm. So here's humanity without God, who said we're going to build a tower to the heavens, and God has to come down to see what we tried to build. It's like, now where is it? I can't see it. Just a second. I'll have to come down. I mean, it's biblical sarcasm. Don't miss that. Now, let's just do a thought experiment, though, for a second. Let's just suppose this is it. This is it. There's no God above us. There's no one who sees the whole perspective. It's just us. We're left with it. So let's get on with it. Let's build some great cities. What happens if that's the truth? You're going to build a city, and maybe they'll be great, but you're always going to be saying about how your city is better than their city. What are you going to do if that's what we say how it works? What are we going to do? We're going to cement forever into the human story that there's always an us and an always a them. And it's always going to be us against them. Or let's just say, okay, that's it. So we're going to there's a religious impulse. We're religious. So be the kind of religion that you want to be. Then build a tower to the heavens, and whoever has the biggest tower wins. And if there's a God, well, it's up to us to reach that God. What would happen if you did that? You would be cementing forever into the human story, striving. Like, I'm never quite good enough. Or let's just say this is it, and you're going to, you know what we have to do? We have to make a name for ourselves. And so we'll always be fighting for the top. What are you going to do? You're going to cement into the human story forever, anxiety and never being enough. Oh, I'm always anxious. Am I enough? Let's just say this is it. And so you're like, well, we got to mobilize fear, so let's avoid being scattered. And you'll claw to not be alone. And what will happen is you will cement fear into the human story. Now, I got to be honest with you. If that's it, this would explain, wouldn't it, why we struggle so much to understand each other. It might be the most cogent explanation that I know. Honestly, the Bible has us pegged. And if so, and we could agree that this is what's happening, wouldn't we want someone to come down and frustrate that human project and remove from the human project us and them, and remove from the human project striving, and remove from the human project anxiety, and remove from the human project fear? Wouldn't you want that? Or would you be like, someone please come down into this mess and frustrate what we've gotten wrong? Wouldn't you want that? Now, the Bible, I've got wonderful news for you. The Bible is the book of Christians, and it tells a different message. And it says that God comes down. And when God comes down, it's always for the sake of our redemption. It's always to rescue us from what we've done to ourselves. You could go to Exodus chapter 3 when Moses is trying to figure out what to do about the Israelites enslaved there in Egypt. And here it is on the screen. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. God sees your misery. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. Do you know God's concerned about your suffering? So, what's it say? I want you to say it out loud with me. What does it say? So, I have come down. You say it again. Ready? So, I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians. In the Old Testament. Now, go to the New Testament, because we're Christians, right? We believe in Jesus. So, John chapter 1, verse 14, John's talking about how Jesus came into our world, and this is what he says, the Word became flesh. The Word's God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. In other words, he came down. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Man, that's beautiful news. So God's full of truth, meaning God tells you, don't build without me anymore. Don't build your family without me anymore. Don't build your business without me anymore. Don't build your life without me anymore. Listen, I've spent time in my life trying to build. You know you try to build wonderful things without God. You know you can try and build a church without God. Did you know that? I don't want to do that. I want to build my family with God. I want to build our church with God. I'm over building without God. Are you? And then, so that's the truth, is Jesus is also full of grace, saying, I came to close the gap. I reach out to you first. You know the towers are what put Jesus on the cross, the Tower of Rome and the Tower of Religion. They conspired together and they hung Jesus on one of their instruments of torture by which they say, be very, very afraid. And you know what? That's Jesus on the cross. What is Jesus on the cross doing? He took this instrument that they used for fear and for separation and anxiety. And what did he do? He redeemed it. He used it. And he said, in doing this with my body on the cross, I am closing the gap between you and God forever. It is the death of religion. It's God's grace. God's full of grace. Let me give you one image, and then we're going to be done. We're going to sing a song. If you go one more chapter, Genesis chapter 12, and you find out that God calls Abram, and we miss this because we miss the geography, and he calls him out of Ur. Do you know where Ur is? Right in the plain of Shinar. And God says, Abram, through you, I'm going to bless the whole earth. What does that say? It says that God calls you out of whatever mess you are currently in. Come on, somebody. I've gotten it completely wrong, Scott. I have tried forever to make a name for myself. I have tried to build something that would protect me, and it's never worked. Oh, wonderful news for you. God takes people right out of the mess that they have built for themselves and says, come on, let's do this different. I've tried to be religious my whole life. I've tried to do all the right things. I've been saved. I've been sanctified. I teach a Sunday school class. I go on mission trips, and I just still feel this sense of disconnection from God. How do I get it? I don't Man, out of the mess of religion, God calls people. Did you know, if you fast forward into the book of Acts, when Jesus has offered his body on the cross, he's risen from the dead, he's ascended, and there's this wonderful outpouring of God's Spirit on the day, what's known as the day of Pentecost. This beautiful outpouring. And do you know what happens on the day of Pentecost? Everyone hears the good news in their own language. Whereas before, they were in the middle of Babel, where everything is confused and they don't understand. They finally hear the good news in their own language. What's happening? God is saying, if you go with me, I will even overturn the places where you have been confused.